everybody, welcome back to The Hobby Musician. Today we're going to be taking a time-lapse journey through the entire building process of our single-cut fretless bass. You can see here we're starting out with the neck blank, and we're using just kind of salvage strips of wood, and they weren't quite thick enough to, vertically to make a usable blank. So what I'm doing is I'm first making two separate blanks that are gonna be, I wanna make sure that they're flat and everything here, but by making the width I need first, you can see in the second step, after I kind of sanded them down, I went back and now I'm gonna glue and laminate them one on top of the other to kind of get that total or overall thickness that I need. So again, just trying to be really careful and make sure I'm evening out the pressure. Now you can see here, once I'm done with those, I do pull out the thickness planer because whenever you're laminating something, you're going to get glue that kind of leaks out the bottom or squishes out the top. So all I'm using this planer for is to kind of get some of those globs of glue off, but then I'm carefully measuring and checking to make sure that the final thickness, I'm taking off just a little bit more wood to make sure the blanks are what I need. Now moving on to the body. We said before, we're using just salvage materials. So these are essentially just leftover desk pieces, like modular desk pieces. And I'm just cutting them down in strips that are gonna be the thickness that I need for the body, because I'm gonna stand these up and effectively laminate them as well. Now, the problem was that this had that kind of fake plastic veneer, like that fake wood kind of surface on it. So I'm using my planer to literally only skin off that plastic top and bottom piece on each side of these strips so that I'm back down to a wooden surface that I can glue. Now, once all the strips are cut to size, you can see I just stack them up and I measured to make sure that I had the width that I need for the ending design. And it was just back to laminating, getting the glue on there, clamping them together, just like we did with the neck to get a solid piece of wood. And after we had that wood, the creativity gets to start here. We're using templates just really for getting really accurate neck pockets, really accurate scale lengths, placement of the important parts. But you can see here, I'm taking my time. I'm just trying to creatively change, the shape of the body, the curves, just to kind of what I see in my head. And that's where the customized, the creative part can really come out when you're doing a build, even though you're using templates. Well, we got all of our designs ready, and now it's time to cut the body out. You don't need too fancy of a setup here. You can see I'm just using a jigsaw, and I'm doing little sections by little sections. I'm clamping it, making sure that I can move around and get close to my lines. And then when I'm done, I'm just trying to smooth out the edges for later steps where we're going to be rounding off things. And here is the first of the finishing steps. I've got a round over bit on my router table here, and I'm just really carefully going around both the top and bottom edges. Now, depending on where the neck pocket is and things, I kind of would start and stop a little earlier so I didn't, round over a place where I wanted it to hold in the neck. But the rest of the edges, both top and bottom, I wanted to have a nice smooth round edge, so this is a perfect way to get that. Now jumping back over to the neck, this build I was experimenting for the very first time in trying to create an angled headstock, and I'm using the scarf joint method. So I built this rig to hold the neck blanks at the exact angle that I want. I'm making a 13-degree angle on this headstock, and the way you accomplish that is you have to cut, that angle into the surface of the neck blank. So I turned it on its side and I'm cutting down, and this jig and everything, you can see that extra piece of wood I'm using to hold it into the jig. That allows us to get a really, really good solid face. Then when you have its matching face, I come back with these clamps and, measuring and double checking and making sure everything was good, I drilled in some guide holes that were outside of where I was going to need, the final neck to be. And once I had those guide screws, I could come back with some glue and glue down and clamp really tightly that angle. But because I had the screws in there, I knew it wasn't going to shift around and I was going to get the exact angle I needed. Now coming back, while I was letting that dry, I started in on the belly cut, that comfort cut on the back of the bass. I knew I was going to be playing this for a long time, so I wanted it to be comfortable. And you can see here, you don't need too fancy of a thing. You can do it with hand files, or you can just kind of get a grinder and really grind in that angle that you're looking for. Now, starting to look at getting the cavities kind of routed in. I went back to those templates that I had, and even though the outside of the body doesn't match, I can still use the cutouts, the placements for some of these more functional parts of the build. And I was always checking to make sure that I was getting just the right depth and not cutting through the front of the guitar. So finally, that headstock had dried, so I jumped back onto working on the neck. And you can see here, I've got a really simple jig where I've just taken a straight board and clamped it to my workstation. Then I very carefully placed and kind of fixed that neck so that as I'm running my router up and down the board on the left side, it is keeping it completely and perfectly straight so that I can see exactly where I start and where I stop. And then I just run this multiple passes, getting that bit deeper and deeper until I have the perfect depth of my truss rod cavity. And once that truss rod is kind of ready to go, now I'm starting to prep the fingerboard. So I'm trying to get the right dimensions of it. So when I put it on first, I went back to the template. Now I'm kind of just rough cutting some of the excess off of it. And once the excess is gone, then I switch over to my router so I can get really close and a perfect match for the shape of the fingerboard to match the shape of the neck. All right, back to the body. I'm starting to work on the neck pocket now. We're getting close to being able to sort of do some test fitting. So I go back to my templates, and this is where I had to do a little design. The body that I created extended beyond where the template stopped, so I had to get creative. I just routed out the cavity first where the template was. Then I had to move and match the line of the template to extend beyond the original pocket. All right, even though it's a fretless guitar, one of the things that I wanted to do was visually have markers that go up and down the neck. So unfortunately, I still have to sit down and go through and cut by hand every single fret where it would normally go if I were to install frets. But this is going to allow me to have those places where I can come back later with some of the paint and the visual elements to really amp up the overall design of this. And here's where the design starts. Those fret slots now act as channels, and I've got little plastic syringes and some enamel paints, really bright fluorescent paints, which kind of go along with the color scheme that I'm envisioning for this. And I'm just flooding those fret slots that we created, and I'm doing coat after coat. And as that paint is drying, I'm able to build it up and match the surface to get those lines, and it still is a fretless guitar. So now to carve the curve into the back of the neck, I just use a faceting method where I draw lines that are halfway from the edge and just meet them up, and you can kind of get these gradual curves, and it's a really easy method. With that done, now I'm clamping everything down and I'm using a radius block to also sand off any excess paint that kind of stuck out, as well as get the curvature into the fingerboard. And a little pro tip for you out there, this actually ends up being the most physically intensive part of any build that I do. It is just hard. You just have to put a lot of elbow grease into radiusing a fretboard, but hey, it's worth it in the end. Now we're jumping over to some 21st century stuff. In all of our builds here on the channel, I really enjoy making and designing my own pickups. So what I'm showing here is we did a very deep dive episode into the thought process and all the tools and the way that I design those pickups. But showing here, this is what I sit down and do. I take the dimensions that I want, from the templates that I'm using, and I know that the actual like size of the cavities in there, and I transfer that to the software and I start to build out. I know that I'm going to need covers, so one piece is going to have to be that big rectangular cover. I know I'm going to need a back plate to kind of close everything in. And then I have these internal bobbins where I need to place the holes according to where these strings are actually going to be. And then I'll be able to put my magnets into those bobbins and wind the copper wire. So this is all something that I can do in the software. And then once the models are done, I know that the dimensions are accurate. I can take this to a 3D printer and print these parts out. And then you're just ready to go. Once you have these parts, you can sit down with a winding machine and start to actually assemble your own custom designed pickups. Here is a winding machine. It doesn't take anything fancy. This is a hand crank machine that I got way back a long time ago. And you can see once you stick those bobbins onto it, you just kind of lay back, put on some music and spin away. There's a counter on the front of that I'm watching and checking. And as I go, I can decide how many winds I want. And I can check the resistance and really fine tune any of the pickups we designed for this. All right, no custom pickup is complete until you wax pot it. So here we're just showing, this is a mixture that I had put together. This is about 80% paraffin and 20% beeswax, but you got to melt it down. And once it's melted down, I'm going to keep checking it with an infrared thermometer. I try to get about the 150, 160 range. And once it's there, you just pop in these pickups. You can see the bubbles coming out. That's air escaping from the inside, and it's getting replaced by this wax mixture. You then pull them out and let them dry, and now you've got wax that helps insulate those pickups. Well, it's time for cosmetics. I know what color scheme that I want for this. So the first thing I need to do is I'm priming the body. You can see outside, hanging it up in a tree. I do very, very thin, light coats, but I do about 5 or 6 of those coats to make sure that I got a good, bright white base for the next kind of step in this process. Once that body's dry, now we're going to start to do some creative stuff. I wanted to do a splatter paint, kind of a crazy, unsymmetric, wild thing. So I've got it laid down in the yard, and I'm just taking a paint stick with the various colors, and I'm going color by color, and I do a few passes, just light splatters on the front and the back. And when it's dry, I flip it over and I do the same thing to the front. You can see here, after it's dry, now it goes back up to hang in the tree for clear coat. I do a very similar thing. I make sure that I do about 5 or 6 thin coats of clear, because I try to avoid getting drips and runs, and it saves on sanding time later. So that's what we're doing here, just 5 or 6. You wait about 10 minutes in between coats, and you can really get a good product. Let it dry for a few days, and you're good to go. Now it is assembly time. So we're doing all this ourselves. So I ordered just a kit of parts. I've got the pots, I've got the resistors, capacitors, and the wires, and I am using just an available wiring design for a 2 pickup kind of jazz bass style wiring system. And I'm using a cardboard cutout that I measured and put into the cavity itself so that I know all the components are going to actually fit and line up with the holes that we put into the surface where the knobs are going to go. Now, with all that done, it is time to install the rest of it. So we have our finished pickups, which we're drilling the holes in there. We're getting the depth and the height, or I should say, of the pickup set correctly. We're also doing things, we're gonna make sure that we shield the cavities, to get a good, low noise, low hum kind of a situation. We're getting the bridge on so that we can get the ground wire there. And ultimately getting the tuning pegs on, and that really is it. So after all of that, we can now kind of do an overly dramatic reveal of the finished product. I just want to thank you all for watching, and until next time, play on, my friends, play on.